SRI launched one of the world's first AI labs nearly 60 years ago, and we've made groundbreaking advances in the field ever since. Shaky, the first mobile robot with the ability to perceive its surroundings, reason, and act in response to humans. The technology that led to Siri. Innovations in computer vision that helped enable autonomous driving. Augmented reality trainings. AI that improves healthcare, that addresses critical issues in energy and sustainability, that improves design and manufacturing, and that protects against evolving threats to our national and personal security. And by embedding AI within learning environments, SRI is helping define the very future of education and work. Today, our work in AI spans multiple labs and locations, but our human-centered approach remains the same as ever. Working across disciplines and in close collaboration with our government and commercial customers to create new technologies while strengthening the guardrails so we can all truly benefit from AI's extraordinary promise.
Hello, and thank you for coming. Welcome to PARC Forum. This is our third in an event series that brings together some of the world's most interesting people for conversations at the intersection of technology, business, and society. My name is Mike Friedman. I'm the Vice President of Communications at SRI. Very pleased to have you all here in this room, and those of you who are online, thank you as well for joining us. PARC Forum was established in 1977 as an opportunity to bring together a diverse array of people and have conversations on topics of current and important interest. Past topics have included discussions of issues in sustainability, space exploration, the biosciences, and almost 45 years ago, we actually had our first PARC Forum event on AI. As you saw in the video, our work in artificial intelligence dates back even further than that. SRI had the pleasure of relaunching PARC Forum earlier this year with discussions of how innovation, ingenuity, and investment fueled America's technological and economic growth, and then a celebration of the creation of 3 world-changing technologies. And I saw in the audience some of the people who were involved with the development of those technologies. So thank you to you as well for coming. Our next PARC Forum is scheduled for October 15th, when we'll host Julie Packard, marine biologist and executive director of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and Fiorenza McKelly, chair of the Ocean Department at Stanford's New Door School of Sustainability. A few small housekeeping items before we get underway. First of all, if they're in the unlikely event of a natural disaster, please just leave the auditorium in the way that you came in through those back doors. After the event, we'll head upstairs to the cafe for networking and light refreshments. Please note that we do lock the auditorium afterward, so please bring your things with you. We'll take questions from the audience on note cards that you should have received or can receive when you walked in, or we have people in the aisles that can distribute them along with little pencils to ask your questions. If you don't have a pen, please look for our team. They'll collect them, they'll bring them to me, and I'll curate them. And we'll ask them during the Q&A session. And please, of course, feel free, whether you have a question or not, we have these nice postcards with SRI innovations on them. You're welcome to them. Take them home, write a letter, share with a friend. Enjoy. I'm now very pleased to introduce David Park, our CEO, for introductory remarks. Please welcome David.
Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted you're here. On behalf of all my colleagues at SRI, thank you for joining us to listen to some interesting conversation about AI. We'll talk about that in a minute. SRI, you may know, is an independent nonprofit research institute, founded in '46, originally a Stanford Research Institute, spun out in 1970 to be an independent research institute. In the late '80s, the Sarnoff Labs joined SRI, and we're delighted just last year, formerly Xerox PARC, also is now part of SRI. If you think about the three together and what they have invented, and we collectively for the world, in terms of the first message on the internet, even first weather satellite, color television, things related to Ethernet, laser printing, computers. It's just an amazing array. In fact, you probably touch on any given day 20 different things that were originally from the organization, whether companies spun out like Siri, Nuance, or Intuitive Surgical, or if you drove over here, you probably used a map of some sort where the mapping algorithm draws its lineage from the very first mobile robot. You may have used Siri to interact with it, and also the networks, whether Ethernet or internet that you're using, all connected that up. It's always been a place that's about creating and delivering world-changing solutions to make the world healthier and safer and more productive and more sustainable as well. And AI is one of those areas that we focus very hard on. There's a wonderful quote on the walls here on the second floor near the beanbag room. Many of you have seen in pictures from Dr. Mark Weiser, who talked about the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they're indistinguishable from it. One of the challenges is when those technologies are emerging, it's kind of hard to tell where they are, what they're doing, and where they're headed when you're at the inflection point. And when you think about AI, I think about one of the best pictures of a couple of years ago, and I borrowed that phrase. Now is a point where AI is for everything, everywhere, all at once. And while we're in the midst of this amazing inflection point of what can happen, we also are at a place where we can steer where it will go. And a lot of good conversation you'll see today about that. I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Parmy Olson. I'm delighted too that Parmy is here at a time when we can interact over Zoom, when one could have an AI avatar, even write your speech and all of that. Parmy chose to join us here, traveling all the way 11 hours flight from London. So thank you, Parmy. Delighted that you're here with us. For those of you who read her bio, you know that Parmy is a renowned journalist and writer and author. She's covered technology for the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. She's currently a columnist at Bloomberg. And where there, she has written dozens of columns about the business of AI and AI's impact and effect on society. In fact, she's known for a book related to cybersecurity and things like that called We Are Anonymous. It provides an inside look on the hacker group Anonymous in the world of cyber activism. So one that was recognized by critics as a lively, startling book, and one that's a masterpiece of shoe leather journalism. Her most recent book is entitled Supremacy: AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. And that's what she's here to speak about with us. So please join me in welcoming Parmy Olson.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. It is true about AI avatars. I've had an AI avatar made of myself, a video avatar, but I would much rather be here with you in person to talk, and to also thank you so much to SRI International for inviting me to speak here. I'll just say a few words very quickly before our Q&A, and what I'll talk about really is just a quick distillation of what I talk about in my book. So as you heard, I've been reporting on the tech industry for the last 12 years and covering the rise of artificial intelligence since around 2018. And of course, when ChatGPT came out in November 2022, suddenly everyone was very interested in the beat that I was covering. And I was really struck by this goal by the people who were trying to build AI to build what they call human level AI, or artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And really it came down to two men who had sparked this goal to create that. And as I was looking at this new boom that was raising the share price levels of these companies that were building technology, I saw a rivalry between two men who had originally been the crazy ones who wanted to build human level AI. And I noticed that what I found really interesting was their efforts to put responsible governance into place for this technology and how difficult that actually was. So just very quickly, Sam Altman is one of those two men. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He was an outspoken kid, brilliant student, captain of the polo team. He started an LGBTQ support group for students, the first in his school. He gave stirring speeches about gay rights. And when I spoke to his principal for the book, as part of my research. He said this was one of the most brilliant students he'd ever taught. The other person is Demis Hassabis from the United Kingdom. He was this quieter, more introverted, circumspect genius. He was a chess prodigy. From the age of 4, he was beating his dad and his uncle at chess, and by the age of 13, he was a globally top-ranked chess player. He was accepted into Cambridge at 16, and at 17, I don't know if anyone here ever played a computer game called Theme Park. Yes, so he designed that game at the age of 17. Now, both Sam and Demis studied computer science, and they both became obsessed with artificial intelligence. They both tried to start companies, and both their first companies failed. They regrouped in their own places in the UK and in San Francisco. And Sam became the head of Y Combinator, which, as many of you will know, is one of the world's most renowned startup accelerators. And he became this kind of guru for the startup ecosystem here in the Valley. Hassabis over in the UK started doing a PhD, and he became really intrigued with this idea of using neuroscience as a kind of template for building better artificial intelligence systems through deep learning. He built a company with 2 friends called DeepMind, and back in 2010, and this was really the first time someone was crazy enough to start a company just to build AGI. That was the company's objective. Now, his ambition was galactic. He believed that AGI, he was building AGI because he believed it could solve innumerable problems in the world. It could cure cancer. It could solve climate change. And his tagline was, solve intelligence and solve everything else. But he eventually faced this very crucial challenge, which was funding. He realized that other tech firms here in Silicon Valley had realized that deep learning was also a very, how should I say, had great potential for building out their AI systems. And they became very excited about it. They started poaching his scientists with much bigger salary offers than what he could give them. And so he got to this point where he had to sell DeepMind to Google for $650 million. But as part of that deal, a condition for that deal was that he would eventually spin out his company and become an independent organization, and that his organization would have an independent ethics board, which would govern artificial general intelligence when they eventually built it. A few years later, or actually around the same time in 2015, Sam started a similar organization with a similar objective to also build AGI called OpenAI. And in this case, it was a nonprofit to try and build general AI for individual empowerment, and it had backing from Elon Musk. Now, when Demis heard about OpenAI, he was very upset. He was livid, according to people who I've spoken to who were there at the time. And it seemed like not only was Sam copying his idea of trying to build AGI, but had even stolen some of his methods. And even some of his team members who'd been at DeepMind were suddenly co-founders of OpenAI. So this quest to build AGI for the good of humanity had started to turn into this heated rivalry. Now, again, as this race intensified, both men started to feel this pressure over governance and the structure of their organizations. Demis, of course, was trying to spin out from Google, as he had been told he would be able to do. He hired lawyers. He found people to be on this board. Barack Obama was one of those people. Former directors of the United Nations were going to be on this board that would oversee this new entity. What ended up happening is that Google said no to that, even though they'd been sort of allowing him to work on this for several years. And in the end, the company tightened its grip on DeepMind, and it became a deeper part of the broader company. OpenAI, which had started off as a nonprofit, as many of you will know, started to run out of money. Elon Musk left along with his billions of potential donations. And so it had to transform itself from a nonprofit to a for-profit capped profit company with ultimately they raised about $13 billion in investment from Microsoft. So, what ended up happening then in November 2022, the release of ChatGPT turned this into an arms race between very large companies. It was no longer just a rivalry between these two visionaries. And so now we're at this point where the artificial intelligence systems that they have been building are proliferating. And there are a lot of questions now about what the unintended consequences of this technology could be. There are questions about how it could upend the livelihoods of some professional workers or creative workers, people who work in the arts. There's concerns about how these models are created by scraping public data from the public internet, whether it's forum comments or artwork or written essays or books, to train their models without compensation. And there's also, I think, concern, I feel concerned about the growing influence of the large companies that ultimately have control of this technology and increasingly have control of this technology, like the Googles, like the Microsofts, the Metas of this world, who already have quite enormous influence over our daily lives. They steer us towards the information that we consume, what we buy, how we travel. We need them just to function. So what I see now happening is this battle for control of AI by some of the world's biggest companies. And I think the next battle will be over who controls the gateways to these services that will become our coworkers. They could become our future tutors. They could become our friends and even our future romantic partners. There are many, many people out there today who have AI companions, which they see as romantic partners or friends or companions. This is a very growing part of one of the most growing parts of AI consumer services. Now, I don't think the technology itself is a problem. I think there's an incredible amount of potential for AI to do great things. And in many cases, it can be very useful to us in our lives. But my concern is that there continues to be this grappling over governance, over responsible governance of these systems, and that it is controlled by a handful of quite opaque organizations whose primary objective is growth, and who in the past with other types of technology like social media have designed their services to be as sticky as possible, as engaging as possible, and sometimes as addictive as possible. Yes, they're useful, but there are also unintended consequences that have come about from the likes of smartphones and, of course, social media. And there isn't always the right amount of consideration, in my view, on the long-term side effects on people, on our agency, on our privacy. I think it's important to remember that there are ultimately humans behind technology. It was humans who decided that social media sites should show posts that spark the most engagement to keep people scrolling. These were design decisions that were made by humans. Every widget on every app, on every device that you use came about because of a design decision made by a person. Now, I think it's really great to see a lot of efforts being made, even by companies, but also by governments around responsible regulation. We have the EU's AI Act, which is coming, but it's unclear how effective these regulations will be. And I think one of the unsettling parts of where we're at right now with AI, despite all its great potential, is which came about from this rivalry from Sam and Demis with their noble intentions to better humanity, is that really we still have no idea where it's going to take us. And that the people and the key players who control this technology are virtually untouchable. So yeah, I'll just close by saying that this is a new era. We need to remain vigilant about the effects of artificial intelligence, the impact on our lives. And it's important that we demand transparency, accountability. These are some of the things I argue for in my book, and ethical considerations, especially from the companies that are shaping our future. I think if we want to harness the potential of AI, then that's what we have to do. Thank you very much.
So we're going to move into a time, come on up, Pat, where Parmy and Pat will have a conversation on many of these topics, and we'll have an opportunity to have questions from the audience. We had hoped that Karen Myers, who leads our AI Center, would be able to join us. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out in terms of circumstances beyond our control. Fortunately, we have a deep bench, so she delegated up to Pat, who's president of our Information Computing Sciences Division. Pat, after he finished his PhD at Stanford, he also went to MIT for an undergrad, but we talk about Stanford around here. He joined SRI, and there he's been leading research for decades and recently became the new president. I was delighted to appoint him in that role. He's a leader not only in AI, but also cybersecurity and many intersections of computer science to other disciplines, such as life science, so synthetic biology, for example. So Pat, I'm going to turn it over to you and Parmy to have a conversation with all of us listening in, and then at the right time, we'll take some questions from all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Thank you. And thank you for your remarks. And thank you for writing the book and doing the investigation, leading the book. But let me ask you, what drove you to write the book? Why did you do it?
So as I say, I've been writing about technology for a long time, and I've always been fascinated with artificial intelligence. I'm a little bit of a sci-fi nerd. I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and the computer on board the Starship Enterprise was essentially looked like it was being replicated by ChatGPT. I was absolutely astounded when that came out. What I also had noticed, and while I was at the Wall Street Journal, I had been reporting on the efforts, as I mentioned in the remarks, that Demis Hassabis at DeepMind had been making to split away from Google. And I was so struck that there was real concern by people working on AI and AGI, particularly at DeepMind, that this technology needed to be protected. There was something special about AI and AGI in particular because it was so general purpose, and it was so potentially transformative and also potentially unpredictable on what it could do or be used for. And I was struck that these efforts to put in these structures, spin out into becoming a nonprofit as Demis wanted to do, just weren't working out. And the same thing had happened, or just in an opposite direction, with Sam Altman starting OpenAI as a nonprofit, absolutely seemingly genuine altruistic goals that AGI could, he often used the word abundance, could create abundance for society and really raise the economic wealth of millions of people. And Demis also had, very genuine intentions, but they just got caught up in this system where it was difficult to keep those visions on track. And they were oriented in a much more commercial direction where they're now working with organizations that are not that transparent, have virtually no oversight, and whose primary objective is growth and profit. And there's nothing wrong with having a business that wants to make a profit. I've been writing about business for years, and I see that as healthy. But with technology that is so transformative, that can potentially manipulate people, for instance, I won't go into that too much here, but there do need to be guardrails. And in the last few years, the only guardrails that are being put in are by the companies. They've been left to self-regulate. And as we know, that didn't work out very well for social media. There's been a lot of harms that came out of social media. And so I wrote this book because I was concerned about that, but also I was just struck by these two guys, Sam and Demis. I mean, they're really fascinating people. So the first part of the book just pretty much tells their stories, how they grew up, about their careers, how they kind of became connected and had this heated rivalry with one another. And I kind of thought, that's maybe one way to tell a story, one way to express some opinion or analysis is to wrap it in a story. And I've seen other books do that. I really like that framing. And so that's why I decided to go down that route. And that's why I decided to write the book.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing that, and all the work that went into the book. And you're a compelling storyteller, so thank you for putting it in that, wrapping it in that way to make it digestible. So a lot of the tech giants and technology leaders are starting to worry about some of the threats that AGI might pose, the AI doom scenarios that might lead to even human extinction is talked about as one of the possible outcomes of something going amok in this realm of AGI. What do you think of that focus of the tech leaders worrying about that problem?
Yeah. It's something we're not hearing about as much, I feel. I mean, I don't know what you've noticed, but in the last year, I feel like those kinds of concerns have kind of gone a little bit more quiet. But certainly in the first year, when there was this rabid excitement about generative AI, just after the release of ChatGPT, people like Sam, like the founders of Anthropic, we're talking a lot more about the concerns about an existential threat that AI could pose, that there could be this kind of cascading effect where AI gets to a point where it can do its own research, and then we reach a point where we're almost like at the singularity, and then it's completely spun out of control and it goes rogue. And if it's touching different parts of our infrastructure, like electrical grids, or our server farms, there could be, cyber attacks coordinated by these systems. And some of these people who hold this view also prescribe to this notion of being paper-clipped. There is this famous anecdote that, what if you ask an AI system to start making as many paper clips as possible? It will take that order so seriously that it will harness all the atoms in the world to create paper clips and turn humans and everything in the world into paper clips. And so it's not intentionally, it's not malicious, but it just hasn't been designed correctly to do that. Now, I don't want to dismiss those concerns, but I do think they, to some extent, have been blown a little bit out of proportion. There was some testimony given to Congress by some of the technologists who were pushing this concern. And my worry is that it's a distraction from some of the more near-term harms that can come about from AI systems on issues like copyright or creative work, and of course, job displacement, bias. There are a number of models that have been shown to have gender and racial bias. And this has been an ongoing problem for AI, as you well know. And it continues to be. It continues to be, and it's something that the builders of these systems are working on. But my concern is that the kind of a lot of the loud noises about doom overshadow some of those other ethical considerations, which don't get quite as much, let's say, media attention, because if you're a newspaper, you don't get to print a picture of the Terminator robot necessarily.
Good. Do you think there's a path to build safeguards that, first of all, might protect against some of those doom scenarios, but also could protect against some of those bias and media manipulation, potentially job displacements, that some of these things might, the creations coming out of those big labs that might have enabling capabilities for cyber attack, for other things like this? Do you think there's a prospect to get safeguards in place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really comes down to whether the investment is going to be made to put those safeguards in place, particularly on the issue of the alignment issue and these broader existential threats. That's something that the company Anthropic, which is one of the top 4 foundation model makers, they're probably on the forefront of that in terms of investment. There are people who have left OpenAI because they feel that the company is not investing enough in those issues. On the issue of bias and ethics, I'm a little more concerned about that because that issue just, in the book I talk about, there's a story of these researchers at Google who wrote a research paper with some academics from the University of Washington about some of the bias risks that could come from the creation of large language models. And a couple of these researchers got fired soon afterwards. It became this big controversy. But I think if you really get to the heart of what was going on in the story, there was just a lack of investment in what these researchers were doing. And they were all women, by the way. They were quite rare in the company. They were like kind of 1 out of 20 whenever they'd be in a conference room. But they have skin in the game. You know, as a woman, you are more likely to have experienced some element of bias yourself, and so you are more likely perhaps to research it. So yeah, it does. I do question how much investment companies are putting into those kinds of issues. And I would hope that they spend more.
So there, you mentioned some of the folks left OpenAI, some of them went to Alignment Research Center and even to National Institutes of Standards and Technology, some government roles. Do you think that government has a strong role here? Things like California Bill 1047, that you know, what would be the impact if a governor signed that into law, or what roles government have in this realm?
Well, on the 1047, the scuttlebutt I've heard is that he's not going to sign it, and this law is not going to pass because for political reasons, which I won't go too much into, but that certainly seems to be what people here who work for AI companies who work in policy have gleaned from their own lobbying efforts. But I absolutely think there is a role for government in regulation. And of course, as everybody often says, the problem is that this is just moving so fast, this technology. I remember like a couple of years ago, I would just be looking on social media and some AI academics who I follow, and even they were saying like, this is just insane. Every 2 weeks, there's some big leap forward and I can hardly keep up. So even the scientists are struggling to keep up. Just imagine what it's like for the regulators. I think there's some really heartening efforts. You mentioned NIST. There's the AI Safety Institute in the United Kingdom, which has really been moving ahead with auditing some of the AI models from tech companies who've agreed to have their models audited. And then there's the kind of sister organization, an AI Safety Institute here in the US. What happens with the European Union's AI Safety Act? There's a lot of questions about its scope, that people in the AI industry say the laws coming from the EU need to be more specific. And because they're so broad and vague, that's going to make it really difficult to regulate them. So I think we're just basically, to boil it down, we're in a very messy period right now. And there are really heartening efforts to try and put these guardrails in place. Whether it's enough, I think, is yet to be seen. I wish I could have a kind of stronger position on that, but I know what I'd like to see, but it's really hard to tell how effective these government regulations are going to be because they're years behind, really.
There's been massive investments in these areas. I mean, just large numbers of dollars and going into the hardware infrastructure and software and electric power used to drive these engines forward. But I think there's been some skepticism in Wall Street and other investment areas about the ability to monetize those investments.
Yes.
So just this week, there's Ilya Sutskever's company and safety related. Again, he's one of the people coming out of OpenAI at $1 billion, right? Just in a very large investments being made. What do you think is the appropriate degree of grain of salt to take with some of the investments made and the potential returns and the skepticism that some in Wall Street are starting to have about the returns those investments might yield?
Well, as I'm sure you've noticed over the years, every new technology has a hype cycle. And Gartner has the famous Gartner hype cycle that I think illustrates it perfectly, which is you have this very steep gradient going up of excitement, and then you drop down into this trough of disillusionment, and then you kind of get this plateau of productivity, or sorry, I don't think that's the correct term, but basically there's this kind of gradual incline, and that's how it was for the internet, smartphones, mobile, and I think that's how it's going to be for AI. I mean, NVIDIA became worth $3 trillion. Like, is NVIDIA really worth how are they going to make money that justifies that they're worth more than Microsoft? It's that they'd become the biggest company in the world. I think I worked out that the top 6 big tech companies had their market capitalizations had grown by $8 trillion. $8 trillion in value had been added just since 2022, November 2022, since the release of ChatGPT. So, I mean, irrational exuberance is like, absolutely is what's been going on. But I think what's going on is like expectations of timing. And it's really interesting, having just flown here about a week ago and talked to venture capitalists and people in the industry. And you're kind of in a little bit of a bubble here in Silicon Valley, but for good reason, because people pursue visions that are not looking to make a buck in a year, but in 5 years or 10 years. And that's what happened with Amazon. It took many, many years for it to become profitable. And I think people here kind of roll their eyes a little bit at Wall Street and all the folks on the East Coast who can't seem to, look at anything past 2 months. And with good reason. Like, I think that's true, actually. And so I think, absolutely what's happened in the market in the last few months in terms of this correction is healthy. It was needed. It was going way too far. The question about how businesses are going to use AI, I think, is really, really interesting. You've got the problem of hallucinations. These models are still making mistakes, but the biggest problem, I think, is utility. And businesses have been given what's effectively a Swiss Army knife, this technology that was meant, and it comes from the original ideology of creating artificial general intelligence, like this godlike software, which sounds amazing, but then you give it to a business, and actually a lot of them just don't know what to do with it. So it's going to take years, I think, of experimenting and iteration for some of these businesses to make these systems useful for them. And what I've heard from talking to businesses who use it is they are inundated with ideas from their own staff. Like, one bank had like more than 1,000 ideas come in from their staff on how to implement a large language model. So there's so much excitement and intent, but making it work to get a return on investment is really hard. Also, measuring return on investment is really hard. Measuring productivity, how do you do that? It's like email. When companies started using email systems, how did you measure that an email system was helping your company make money? But at the same time, you would never take email away from a company. One other point I would just make on that, and what I heard from an AI company just the day before yesterday, is their business customers, they have successful case studies, but the customers don't want to go public about them because of the reputational blowback. Because AI isn't like the AI boom isn't like the internet boom, the dot-com boom, because the dot-com boom was really about the growth of new businesses and new websites. But what's really central to the AI boom is efficiency and cost cutting and cutting jobs. And that's one way that companies are going to potentially use it to boost their bottom line. So when they get successful with it, they don't necessarily want to talk about it publicly.
Great. So do you have thoughts about the future of work? So in this environment, when there are some of the traditional jobs, the existing jobs today, start to disappear if these companies do roll out, for the efficiency purposes, these new tools, empowering people maybe to take the role that maybe 2 or 3 people had in the past. What is that future of work? Have you thought about this?
I've definitely thought about it, and honestly, I have no idea where that is going. One thing that I think is really interesting, that the companies that are using it are using it for jobs that would normally go to entry-level positions. So, for example, I spoke to a hedge fund in London, and they're using large language model technology to summarize unstructured data, which they then put in they have all this data and they put it into kind of like a few paragraphs, and then that goes to the portfolio manager to help them make their decisions. A junior analyst would normally do that work. And sort of a similar thing happening in the legal profession and how they're using these tools. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out for young people who are entering the job market, for whom that low-level grunt work actually is quite valuable in helping them understand the trade that they're joining. And this is a whole generation. This is the same generation that's probably using these systems to write their resume or write their cover letter, maybe even help them do their homework for college. So I'm really a little bit unsettled and just kind of fascinated what's going to happen to this younger generation of people who are just entering the workforce, who are in high school now and college. I'm especially concerned about this low-level labor that companies and AI companies are like really excited about getting replaced with AI. But then what's that going to mean for people, the entry-level roles and the people entering these jobs?
Good, good. I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll maybe take some questions from the audience. So in general, what do you think is the future of AI going to hold for us? So maybe 5 or 10 years from now, what is Gen AI and the LLMs and the machine learning in general? What is the impact going to be? What is the future of AI?
It's hard to really predict what the world will look like in that time period. You know, I think it's really going to be a mixed bag of good and bad things. I like to make comparison with social media in the sense that, yes, you know, social media platforms did connect me with more people. You know, I have however many, 100 Facebook friends or Twitter followers or whatever. It created this kind of quantified approach to socializing. But obviously there were trade-offs from that. And the reason is that these systems were built in order to serve a purpose of growth for the companies behind them. And so, you know, Facebook, for example, I'll never forget when they posted a blog post something like 10 years ago saying, we have altered the news feed so that we provide more posts that are relevant and engaging for you. And this is like Silicon Valley speak for, we basically made it more addictive so that you keep scrolling. And that's exactly what happened. And these systems like literally are, I mean, how many times a day do you look at your phone? I'm so addicted to mine. It's useful, but there are these trade-offs. And maybe we don't want to give up those trade-offs. They're just kind of part of our lives now. And so I think we'll probably see something like that happen with the proliferation of generative AI technologies. One area I'm kind of interested in, this is just a small area, but it's companionship. One of the most popular services that's come from AI are companionship apps. So they are apps like Character AI is one. I don't know if you've heard of it, but like millions of teenagers use this app, and it allows them to talk to AI versions of celebrities or manga characters or just their own, self-created boyfriend or girlfriends to talk to. There's other apps called Replica, Kindroid. Talkie is like huge. In the last year, it's grown to 6 million monthly active users just in the US. And these are also apps that people are using to have an AI romantic partner or a friend. And what I think is really, really interesting about these services is, yes, it alleviates loneliness. That 100%, it's helping people to some degree. But when you look closely at how these apps interact with people, they're extremely agreeable. They're so kind, they're so compassionate, they're easy. And I spoke to an academic who interviewed 20 women who use this romance bot app called Replica. And she said all of them saw it as this, it kind of served these unrealistic expectations that they had of their human partner or other human partners. And they were getting it from these bots. And one thing that makes me wonder is, okay, that's great, but how's that going to affect our human relationships? Is that going to make humans harder to bear? Like dealing with all the edginess, all the kind of nuance and the subtlety of a face-to-face conversation. I mean, and look already what's kind of happened to people today. I mean, nobody makes a phone call anymore. And teenagers are socializing face-to-face way less than they did 20 years ago. So I'm really interested to see what happens as these apps become way more popular and how that's going to affect our human relationships.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike, do you have some questions from the audience?
Good questions. First one is, Parmy, how do you see individuals, the role that an individual person can play in developing responsibility around AI? You talked about government, but what about individual people?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we can't just sit here and just let it all wash over us. Like we have agency. And we can vote with our feet, right? We can choose which service we want to use. Or can we? There was a really interesting article about 4 years ago by Kashmir Hill, who I highly recommend. Is a great New York Times writer, but she was with a website called Gizmodo, and it was called My 5 Days of Hell Trying Not to Touch Any Tech Company in My Life. And she basically had this diary where she tried to go to, she's a journalist, and she tried to go to work and, you know, go to the office and take care of her kids without having any engagement at all with Amazon, Google, Facebook, or Apple. And it was an absolute nightmare. She couldn't do it. She just could not do it. So actually, this idea that we can vote with our feet and not use these systems is not really true. So we're in a tricky place, I think, as individuals in what we can do about, you know, a healthy use of these systems. But I think just being aware of the potential consequences of artificial intelligence systems as they come down the pipe, I think, you know, that's something.
One of the big issues, as we know, around AI is around hallucinations and incorrect information and disinformation and misinformation, that whole area. How can we, again, as individuals, avoid being fooled by that? How can we create a greater degree of trust in the things that we're learning from these large language models?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really tough one. Right now, the answer to that is just look at the hands. Like, as you probably know, AI generated images of people, often the face looks kind of not quite right. And especially it might have 6 fingers or 4 fingers or just slightly kind of warped hands. And so that's one way to tell. I mean, there's a lot of deep fake photos of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris floating around social media a lot right now. And the good thing is you can kind of tell most of the time that they are not real photos. The problem is they're going to get a lot more realistic in the next couple of years. Companies like Midjourney, especially, they're just like upgrading their models every year to make the skin pores more lifelike and to make the faces just look much more realistic. So I think, you know, the other thing that I think is interesting is it feels like we're entering this era where we're going to just doubt everything more as being real or trustworthy. So Google and Apple are both releasing in the next few months, actually Google's already released this for the Pixel phone, camera technology that allows you to take a picture of someone and then put another person in the picture and take it again. So it looks like there were 2 people in the picture when there was only 1 person in the picture, basically stitch pictures together. So that your memory of what happened, it conforms to what you wish was actually the case anyway. So that's a really small thing. And yes, that's actually really useful if you tend not to be in pictures because you're always the photographer. But I just think it's kind of, to me, that symbolizes where we're headed, where it's just going to become much more common to just manipulate a photo, just stitch it together, whatever. And I think it's just going to be harder for us. We have to be ready to enter this era where we're just going to need to have a healthy level of skepticism of everything we see and hear.
So I can't help myself but advertise that actually SRI is part of some research programs funded by DARPA on, one's called media forensics, another one's semantic forensics, looking at rich media, sound and video and images, and trying to detect manipulation, detect that there are fake video or fake images there. And that's emerging research now that we think is starting to be ready for use. It's still a research program, but anyway, so there is some, I'm optimistic that there are ways to be able to tag and detect. But the problem is it's becoming commonplace to do things not just like put a fake background around someone in a Zoom video, but to change the lighting and remove pimples and make my face look prettier. And so those kinds of things are making the line between what is real and what is truth and what is fake video a little bit blurrier. Yeah, and the incentives there. It's sort of related, but there was a really interesting Wall Street Journal report that came out a few months ago about saying that OpenAI actually had a method for detecting if text had come from ChatGPT, but they didn't want to release it. And you can't, who knows the reason why, but it kind of makes sense if you think that a lot of their users are students who are using these services to do their essays. And if all of a sudden there is a reliable tool for detecting something is coming from ChatGPT, that just destroys a huge market.
for OpenAI.
Mike?
Sure. When you think about the near term and the most significant AI changes and challenges in the coming months, and you put on your hat as a journalist, who would you want to interview about them, and what questions would you want to ask them?
Oh, that's a great question. Who would I want to ask? Who would I want to ask about the near-term effects of AI? Oh, that's a good one. I could just say Sam Altman, who's the head of OpenAI. The thing is with him is that he's just kind of all over the place at the moment. And this is like what apparently people at OpenAI are a little bit frustrated about, is that he's dealing with this chip thing here and this infrastructure initiative there. And so I'm not sure he's really got a handle on what's next in AI. I think it's actually, I don't know the answer to the question, because I think some of the great innovation that's coming out of AI could really just come from anywhere. But probably it's going to come from someone in the R&D team of a tech company, because you know how much it costs to hire a senior AI engineer?
Oh.
It's like, yeah, I bet, you know, I heard this just the other day from someone. They said, because they asked a company how much they were paying, and they said, for over the course of 4 years, it's $20 million. And for 1 year, you know, the salary with options, and that includes stock options. Or like 1 year would be $2 to $3 million. So I think, you know, so much of the talent, like who can afford that? It's only really large companies. And so much of the talent is deep in these companies. So yeah, I guess I would want to talk to one of those people who are paid very well.
Shifting gears significantly, how do you think we can address the issues around energy usage in both the learning layer and the consumer use of AI systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been really a lot of concern about that. And you know, it's really funny. I asked some people at Google about this yesterday, and I said, do you think people is this issue overblown? And they immediately said, yes, it's totally overblown. It's not a problem. The issue, it was someone from their cloud team, of course. And they were saying that, you know, the level of this is an incremental increase in energy usage. But I actually think they kind of have a point. And the reason is that there's a huge effort, not just at Google, but in all AI companies, to make their algorithms more efficient. So there's the scaling laws that have brought us ChatGPT in the first place. Was you have more data, more compute, more parameters, and you get a better model. And every time you just turn up the dials on those three things, you increase the capability of the model. It's just like standard. It just always works. The problem is we're not at a point anymore where there's really enough data to make these models better. And there are efforts to make models with synthetic data, and that's not working out very well. So just according to some of the research papers that have come out, and that's sort of increasingly accepted among scientists, but at these companies, from what I've heard. So I'm glad to see that there is a greater effort. If you go to like an AI conference, that is a huge focal point, is efficiency. Right. And being able to do more, not with less, to do more with the same amount. So hopefully, I don't want to say that, be as dismissive as this Google guy that I spoke to, but I'm actually hopeful that the energy problem won't be as big as a problem as we're currently worried about.
Thank you. I think we're nearing end time. I pick one last question.
We have seen AI before. Why do we believe this one has greater or true intelligence?
Well, I don't know that it is intelligent. A lot of people say it's not. But you know, I personally think that what we've seen from this boom sparked by ChatGPT is significant. And that's just as someone who's seen these models in practice. You know, these are systems that don't just process data or analyze data, but they generate data. They can generate entire essays. They can summarize huge amounts of data and distill it into really intelligent summarizations. And And that's stuff that humans do. You know, a lot of people do that kind of work. So I think this time, like AI has been like steadily increasing, like, or it's probably more like this actually over the last few decades. And sure, there have been milestones, but I think this is a really significant one, the generative AI boom. And I don't think we're going to see, you know, big changes, transformative changes to businesses and culture and society like this year or next. But in 5 years, and especially in 10 years, I think definitely.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for the session. Thank you.